Hello, I'm Katie Sutton. I'm chair of the Hingham Unity Council. I thank you for coming or viewing tonight for this very important discussion, and again, welcome. The HUC sponsors events and initiatives to foster a more diverse and welcoming community. One thing we try to do is provide places where it's okay to ask questions that may feel a bit awkward, as long as you're listening and curious about different perspectives, so that we can all grow together and work toward building a welcoming community where every single person is treated with dignity and respect. Tonight, I am super excited because in addition to looking at equity and inclusion with a local lens, the HUC also works closely with groups and towns across the entire state of Massachusetts, who share similar goals to ours. We meet regularly with them to share experiences and expertise. And tonight, several of those organizations have partnered with us to produce this important event. And we're constantly adding new partners. Someone from the town of Whitman reached out to me today because they want to start an organization like ours in Whitman. So it's very exciting. So we have an audience that is far larger than Hingham. The Zoom, we have over 100 folks registered for the Zoom viewing. And tonight's event is co-sponsored by our friends at the Network for Social Justice in Winchester and the Weymouth Pride Project. Our community partners, to whom we are grateful, are the Hingham Human Rights Commission, the Hingham Police Department, the Town of Easton's Human Rights Committee, the Hanover Unity Council, the Hull No Place for Hate Committee, and the Town of Wayland Human Rights, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. We also thank Harbor Media for recording the event so it can be streamed later. Now, let's introduce our guest. Dr. Sabine von Mering will speak, and then there will be a question and answer period. We'll be accepting questions both from the room here and on Zoom. Questions will be presented by my good friend Leora Norwich, the Executive Director of the Network for Social Justice. Dr. von Mering is Professor of German and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies and Director of the Center for German and European Studies at Brandeis University. She holds a PhD in German Studies from the University of California, Davis. Together with Monica Hubschker, she co-edited Anti-Semitism on Social Media, published by Routledge in 2022. Previous co-edited volumes include Right-Wing Radicalism Today, Perspectives from Europe and the US, also published by Routledge in 2013. And this year, she published the English translation of Louisa Neubauer and Alexander Repenning's Call to Action, Beginning to End the Climate Crisis, A History of Our Future, with Brandeis University Press in March 2023. A mother of two, she has been a resident of Wayland, Massachusetts since 2003. It is an absolute privilege to have you here with us tonight, Dr. von Mering, and I now turn the podium over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you all for coming. I'm just going to put this here so I don't have to turn around all the time. And let me start the clock so that I don't put you all to sleep. So I just want to start by saying not only thank you for having me, but also thank you for doing this work. I was so impressed when I looked at your website that this exists and that you are doing this and that people are making the effort to have difficult conversations about these issues that are so important. And unfortunately, it's becoming more difficult. And I think social media have something to do with it. So thank you for doing this work. And I'm actually here not just to tell you things, but also to learn from you what you bring to this conversation and how you think we can move forward. So just one more thing about me. I have to sort of get used to the fact that they have to.
Are you ready?
Yeah. That the screen is behind me. I'm not used to that. Yes. So as Katie said, I'm at Brandeis. I have been at Brandeis for 25 years now. As you can hear, I'm originally from Germany. And I came to Brandeis just at the same time as they just opened a Center for German and European Studies with the help of the German government. And in the last decade or so, I've been basically running it. Oh, yeah, that's it. So I think it's working.
Yeah, I'm just trying to hide that panel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're dealing sort of with the online and the in person.
Everyone has to see my face up there.
You can minimize it. You can minimize it.
Okay.
I think,
Okay.
right? Are we seeing people seeing this now? It's probably good if someone is on the Zoom so they can see what people are seeing. Okay. Can you see my slide, Rena? Okay, perfect. So the center is there, and I'm just saying, inviting you all to check it out because we have now over 160 webinars archived on the center website including about issues that I think are of interest to you all. So check it out. The website is easy to find, brandeis.edu/CGES. And as you know, I assume, Brandeis is the only Jewish-founded non-sectarian university in the entire country. So it is a special place also to work at as a German person. I should say, by the way, I am here, of course, not as a representative of Brandeis in the sense that what I'm saying are my own ideas and my own thoughts, not an official representation of the university. But for example, our program tomorrow that you're all welcome to join is with Alexandra Senft, who is the daughter of a Nazi criminal. And she has written a lot about what that means and she's also networked with other children of Nazi criminals, and she's going to talk about her work. I think that will be very interesting. Whoops. And next Tuesday, I'm going to be hosting Lukas Hermsmeyer, and you may have seen his very provocative op-ed in the New York Times last week, how Germany became mean. And he touches on a lot of the issues that we'll be talking about today, although he doesn't talk about social media. But that's next Tuesday at 2, and it's only on Zoom, so anyone can join from anywhere. So what we'll be talking about today is social media and rising extremism. And I thought that it would be helpful to bring a few data points into this discussion. So as you can see here from a study that the Pew Research Center did in 2020, already then 64% of Americans were concerned, saying social media have a mostly negative effect on the way things are going in the US. And it's interesting that the first question that I got before I even got here was exactly about that, namely, well, are social media all bad? And let's see, does this move? Yeah, there it is, okay. And so of course not. And I can tell you, just as an immigrant in this country, when I came to this country in 1992, I moved from Germany to Portland, Oregon, which literally meant being on the other side of the planet. And the only way I was able to communicate with my family at the time were these very thin airmail letters. And they took, if I was lucky, they would take 1 week each way. Often they took 10 days each way, which meant that I would get an answer to my question from my mother 3 weeks after I posed it, right? Which is unthinkable today, but that's how it was. And the phone calls, which this was like the modern kind of phone that had that had the buttons instead of the dial, a phone call was $3 a minute, and I didn't have that money, so it was very rare that we would speak to each other. And so we would really only see each other when I came home for the summer. And that, of course, has completely changed. And now we are in contact basically all the time. We can see each other, and I'm also in contact with hundreds of people, some of which I probably don't know, all the time, from my past and my children's past and whatever. So I do use social media. I also use social media for my activism. I'm a climate activist. As you can see, the book is making the rounds here on the left. So I do even still use Twitter/X. And I also use Instagram for the center because that's where the students are. I've personally started using LinkedIn. I find LinkedIn is sort of, for professional purposes, the most, the least, shall we say, toxic of the social media platforms, and it has all sorts of helpful features, and it's useful. So I'm not saying social media are all bad. It's also important that we understand what are we talking about when we talk about social media, right? And so if you go to the place of all wisdom named Wikipedia, it will tell you social media are interactive, Web 2.0, internet-based applications. That sounds pretty bland. It also says they use user-generated content, such as text posts or comments, digital photos or videos, and data generated through all online interactions. That is the lifeblood of social media. So if you think about that, user-generated content doesn't sound nefarious, right? And yes, we use text posts, we use digital photos, GIFs, memes, whatever. The part where it becomes problematic is the data generated, right? Because social media are really for-profit companies, of course. And so that is where things become dicey. And I have to say, when you read the whole Wikipedia definition, it's quite clear that people were not thinking critically about social media, because it doesn't even mention the fact that these are, profit-generating data collections. If we want to understand how different that is from communicating in the olden days, if you go back to the very old days with mail coming by post, namely in the carriage post, of course, even back then, your messages went through a process where there was the chance that other people could see them, where people might have, done something to them. It wasn't, even then, it wasn't the case that you were necessarily safely communicating from one place to another. But of course, compared to where we are today, it was relatively easy to post something, and you could assume that when you post something for someone, that someone is the recipient, right? And that's also, when we use the word post, we also use that for, messaging boards, and we post something, and the people that are coming there, maybe it's a messaging board that is more widely open, anyone can look at it, but it is sort of a one-way, maybe two-way street, without anything else interfering. What we're doing now, however, is very different, and the social media kind of interaction is very different. And it's very difficult to find good visualization of it, and I like visualizing things. So I was looking for ways in which we can visualize how it is different, because I always have friends on, for example, Facebook, who say, well, I don't understand why my friends can't see what I'm posting, right? And then they post these things like, please share if you see this, or so I know that people share something that doesn't have a picture or something like that. And of course, that's because they're looking at Facebook as a place where they think if I post something, everyone who is my friend sees it. They are applying the pictures that we saw before from the messaging board. They are applying that same logic to an algorithm-driven environment, right? And that's because people don't really understand algorithms. And nowadays, even the people who write algorithms don't really understand them anymore. So that's the problem. So in this image, you can sort of imagine, yes, we're posting something and something happens with it, and then someone sees it, but who sees it has nothing to do with who you want to see it. It really depends much more on what these people are typically looking at and how much time they spend on the social media platform and so on. So it's not under your control anymore. So I was looking for ways to visualize this. So this is one I found that's much more appropriate than the messaging board or the old-fashioned way. Here's another one. And it can help us understand why, if this is how our messages communicate, if this is how we're communicating already, this suggests that there's a problem, right? There's a problem for misinformation and misunderstandings. So the algorithms decide what we see. That's the first issue. And in a way, that in itself shouldn't really be a problem either. I mean, we are dealing with algorithms in many parts of our lives for quite some time, right? We have algorithms for, our movie streaming sites where we get recommendations based on what we've seen before. And so if you find out that, why are the movies all the same? Well, that's because that's how the algorithms work. They think you want the same again and again and again. So that's what you get. So if you want to watch different movies, I suggest searching for and starting to watch some movies that are completely different from the ones that you normally watch. And then you might actually get more interesting recommendations. Another example is, of course, the partner finding dating sites. Also use algorithms. We're very familiar with it. Most people have horrible experiences with it, but it's not nefarious. That said, Yaron Lanier, who was one of the people who actually wrote the code that helped bring about social media, has written this rather spicy little book called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. And that's literally what he recommends. Lanier is also the son of Holocaust survivors, by the way, and he has sort of stripped this problem to the following sentence. He says, social media are bummer machines, okay? And that's behavior of users modified and made into empires for rent. So he shows in this tiny little book that I would recommend everyone give to their teenage relatives, he shows how social media companies are changing us. That's the difference, right? So we are engaging with them, and because of our engagement, we get certain recommendations, and we become involved, and we get sucked into it, and we get down into rabbit holes, and of course the worst part of that is we become more aggressive and more polarized. So you can read this yourself, so I don't get in trouble for using mean language, but this is a quote from the book. And so he says that, I can't really read it without using the word, so I'm just going to let you read it. I'll give you a minute. And so, that's why I think it's a good book to give to teenagers, because they will get a kick out of his language. He's actually an incredibly serious person, and also, by the way, an musical instrument collector, and fascinating philosopher of life. Anyway, so why is this? How does this happen? Well, let's take a deeper look at this. So the giant social media companies have not been around that long, right? But they are humongous. I compiled this just to give you sort of a sense of the numbers. And if I talk a lot about Facebook, I am fully aware that Facebook is not the social media of choice for our youngsters, but it is by far the biggest in the realm of social media, and of course, it's been around the longest. So 3 billion people worldwide are using Facebook. We have 2.4 billion using YouTube, 2 billion using Instagram, and of course, Instagram and Facebook are now Meta, so they belong to the same company. TikTok has 1.2 billion users, but it is the fastest growing, expanding, and used especially by very young people. And Twitter, who knows what's going to happen with Twitter now that Elon Musk took over. So this is worldwide viewership, and this is annual revenue just for Meta. So annual revenue generated by Meta 2009 to 2022 was 116 billion dollars. Just the last 2 years you see was, unthinkable, these numbers. So that's the revenue generated for just Meta. And I found, so here you can see how Meta is, way up there in terms of its revenue. I remember the time when people said, oh, he's never going to make any money with that. And then if you look at this, sorry, I have to. So this is Meta as opposed to, for example, what are we seeing here? Since I can't connect to the internet, I keep getting this warning thing, so I have to keep switching it off. So yeah, you can see the difference between Meta and Twitter, for example, or LinkedIn. But in the most recent period, TikTok has really been the fastest growing. So that is where all our young people are. And so basically 60% of the people in the world use social media, as opposed to just a random alternative, 18% own a car. And this is maybe not a very scientific source, Motor Biscuit, but I assume Motor Biscuit is also not going to have a lower number because they want to hype the number. So basically 3 times as many people use social media than own a car worldwide, right? That's sort of, let that sink in. Like, this is a huge number of people. I highly recommend this documentary that PBS made about Facebook, the Facebook dilemma, because in it, they really talk about how the people who made it became more and more critical of it and nervous about it, and are all telling their children not to use social media, which should tell us something. And what's really important, and we've seen this again and again in hearings in Congress and also in lawsuits, successful lawsuits, given the Supreme Court that we have, is that even though people consume social media like a media company, use it in their lives like a media company, like a public sort of messaging space, they are regulated like a technology company. They're claiming not to be a media company. And that's a problem because, as we quote in the book and is quoted in the PBS documentary, polarization was the key to the model. This is Roger McNamee, an investor early on in Facebook. The idea of appealing to people's lower level emotions, things like fear and anger, to create greater engagement, and in the context of Facebook, more time on site, more sharing, and therefore more advertisement value. That's really what it is about. So in other words, if we're seeing polarization, if we're seeing more extremism generated from and back into the social media world, it is not because people are stupid. It's not because people are so much worse suddenly. It's because it's built into the code. It is the technology, it is the business model to make us all hate each other, basically. And most people don't really think about that, don't really know that. A former student of ours at Brandeis, Sahar Masaji, he came to my class the other day and gave a wonderful presentation about this. He has he used to work at Facebook. He has now created the Integrity Institute, where he's trying to actually make social media a clean and safe space that we can all safely interact in. And he's incredibly devoted and full of ideas of how to do this. But he also showed how, yes, the entire system is built so that the more negative, the more against the rules you are, the more engagement you generate. And engagement generates profit, right? And so it is, again, it's built into the system. And there is therefore no incentive for the companies to change anything about it. And this has real-life implications, as we saw in Myanmar, where Facebook systems promoted violence against the Rohingya. And this is not something that is a conspiracy. This is actually something Facebook admitted that, and it was, published by Amnesty International, and it was also confirmed by the United Nations that Facebook incited the violence. And this is not the only case. There are many other cases. When Monica and I wrote this book, we did not have an example for anti-Semitism yet, but we were talking about the fact that it's only a question of time that this will be used against Jews. And of course, now we have a horrible example of that. So there was one person who really had enough and came out, Frances Haugen, who spoke out against this and who told everyone that this was not something the company was unaware of or didn't really know how to deal with, that this was actually something they were fully aware of, they were warned about, but it was certainly clear that if they changed anything about it, to make the algorithm safer, people would spend less time on the site, and they would click on fewer ads and make less money. So that's really what it is about. And of course, Facebook is not unique in that. They're all doing that, but Facebook is the biggest one. So it is possible. At the very beginning, Facebook was more similar to that old-fashioned messaging board, where you would only see what your friends posted. But now that is no longer the case. And this, in terms of the effect in terms of real life violence, we saw this also on January 6th at the Capitol. And if you remember, at the beginning of the hearings about it, there was a lot of mention of social media. And then there was not a word about social media in the final report, literally none. And the journalists who then did some investigating of that found that, well, there were a lot of interests, because these companies have homes and they are job creators, and they are tax-paying companies to some extent, I guess. And so we did not read anything about them in that report. But researchers have certainly rung the alarm bells for some time. Julia Ebner is one of them, and she wrote a book that is not available, I don't think, in English yet, but I translate the title. It's called Radicalization Machines: How Extremists Are Using the New Technologies and How They Are Manipulating Us. And she says, social media play a vital role in all sorts of radicalizations and generate support for a significant percentage of terrorist acts. So that should really concern us. And what we also know is that teens are especially susceptible to being manipulated by social media platforms. Children under the age of 8, this was at one scholar that I found, they said they consume now 2.5 hours of digital media per day, while teens spend on average over 7 hours per day on screen time. That is not school related. I remember when in Wayland we decided to give students an air book. I was the only one against it. Because I was like, can they not be off the screen at least in school? But the argument was made that it was an accessibility issue, and so everyone needed to be on screens. The Pew Research report that I mentioned earlier also found that nearly all teens have access to a smartphone. So that's jumped to 95% in comparison with earlier years. And nearly half of teens now say they use the internet almost constantly. They admit they are addicted to it. And this is not an issue where wealthier teens or white teens are more likely. No, on the contrary, Black and Hispanic teens, they found, are actually more likely than white teens to say they are online constantly. And they use especially YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok being the one that is moving the fastest. And of course, we're seeing harassment on the sites, among many other problematic things. And the victims of social media harassment are most frequently women, LGBTQ folks, people of color. And now, of course, we're seeing a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism. This has gotten so bad that Meta has been sued by 42 attorneys general who are alleging Facebook, Instagram features are addictive and targeting kids. So this isn't something we're making up in the academic world. Sorry, I'm a little handicapped here because of this funny business with them. So one thing that I would like you also, apart from Yaron Lanier's book, what I would want you to talk to your kids about is that being a bystander on social media is different from being a bystander in the real world. So, and then we'll talk about the war. So in the real world, we tell kids, if you see someone bullying someone, you need to do something. You need to call help, you need to, if you feel safe, interfere, support the person that is being bullied, and so on, right? When we are on social media, the problem is that engaging with the hateful content amplifies the hateful content. And so what we saw a lot in the first days after the October 7th terrorist attack was that people who were upset about it would post about it, and then everyone would engage with it, which actually amplified the original content, which meant that many more people got to see the horrific violence. And engagement can mean dislike. Engagement can mean writing a comment that says, "This is horrific." The algorithm doesn't know what you think. The algorithm only sees you engaging with the content. That's all it cares about. The algorithm sees someone commenting, it's like, ooh, this is important stuff. This is gonna get more eyeballs. This is gonna get more attention. And of course, even when Hamas posts videos on Facebook of horrendous murders and other awful atrocities, you know, the companies are selling shoes on the side. I mean, this is a business, right? So it's very problematic, to say the least. And so the other problem that we saw, and I'll wrap up because we want to have a conversation, but the graphic nature of these videos was also in a very awful way addictive. And so people literally started re-watching them and are still in some cases re-watching them, which is very hurtful, of course, and you know, it's very dangerous for them. At the same time, of course, we saw after the terrorist attack and then the beginning of the Israeli war in Gaza, things just completely got out of hand on social media. So because the civilian death toll very quickly in Gaza, very quickly overtook the death toll in Israel, the communications on social media became a war of their own. And there was a lot of outrage and a lot of, calling people to basically stand with us. Everyone was sort of forced or pushed to take sides. But what we have to remember, we are in a technology-driven environment that is a business that is based on engagement. So again, everyone who was engaging in this way was just helping the companies make more money and making people more angry and making everyone more upset. So it wasn't actually helping anyone. And of course, we know that at this point, at least some of the hostages have been freed, but at the moment, we're not seeing a good end to this. We have seen unprecedented rise in anti-Semitic incidents since October 7, according to ADL and several other outlets. We have seen, they counted more than 2,000, and I have to say, when we wrote our book, Anti-Semitism on Social Media, it was already then several years in a row that the amount of anti-Semitism had gone up. So this is a sharp increase. At the same time, and that's not a coincidence, that often happens, or almost always happens, when anti-Semitism goes up, Islamophobia goes up as well. And so you have here the Council on American Islamic Relations reporting unprecedented reports of anti-Arab and Islamophobic bias. This slide must have slipped. It should have been up higher. And let me see. I think so. The violence, the polarization, the hate is one part of the problem. The other big part is misinformation and disinformation, right? Misinformation, which is spread on purpose. So you have an incredible amount of misinformation and disinformation. I was just listening to NPR since I was stuck in traffic coming here, and they were saying how in the West Bank now, Palestinians, even moderate Palestinians, do not believe the accounts of October 7th. They simply think they are fabricated, which is, of course, nonsense. We have lots of... Hamas itself documented what they were doing, right? So there is no question about the fact, and the people have been buried. So it's very upsetting that there is this disbelief in the facts. And of course, we're seeing misinformation and disinformation on all sides. What I like in the German news that I watch regularly, ever since the Ukrainian war, they have this kind of thing where it says, we cannot verify information that comes from parties at war. And so, which reminds us that serious news outlets are actually required to verify information. Social media are not. Anyone can post anything on social media. There is no requirement to fact check, right? But our serious media outlets are required to fact check. And if they publish something that's nonsense, they have to correct themselves. That is the law. So it's a real problem. The other problem, of course, is this I have no idea what this is doing to the kids who are watching these horrible videos and images. When, the so-called mainstream media report about war, there's such care taken as to what you actually show. There is zero care taken as to what gets shown on social media. No, there's no police. So, I should have brought my water bottle. And of course, we saw that this then reaches into our politics as well, right? I mean, there was a very smart move by the Congresswoman here and whoever else works with her to take a snippet of a 5-hour plus hearing, which I recommend people watch. On PBS, you can watch the whole 5-hour hearing of the questioning of the 3 university presidents. And they start out with very careful statements about how horrific everything was, but no one saw that. Everyone just saw the 3-minute soundbite that says, these presidents are heartless anti-Semites, basically, right? And so this is where we're at. This is why it's a problem. There was a wonderful webinar organized by Hebrew University, I think a week ago, by communications experts who analyze what is going on there. And they show that, yes, there are benefits to the political socialization and the mobilization that around a shared cause that social media can generate. But in terms of actually getting us to converse with each other, to actually build bridges across differences, they are absolutely not helpful at all. It's simplistic, it's extreme, it's often uninformed. So what can we do? And this is my last bit. Sorry, going over time. What can we do? Of course, we must regulate the platforms. That's number one. And people have tried, and the European Union is definitely making more progress on this. Oh, sweet. Than we are in the United States because, of the legal system. Thank you so much. Thank you. This helps. Because at the moment, they are spending a pittance on content moderation. The people who do the content moderation are low-paid workers, often in countries that are around the world where they are, paid nothing and living under very difficult circumstances. And they're literally paid to watch the most horrendous stuff all day long. So that's one. There's like, I think, 15,000 at Facebook for 3 billion users who are online all the time. I mean, it's crazy. And then there's artificial intelligence, which is, as we know, a complete misnomer because it is not intelligent, right? It's pretty dumb. And then there are hundreds or even thousands of volunteers. Think about that. I showed you what these companies are making, and they're relying on the trusted volunteer flaggers. That's how you make billions. So, for example, Facebook actioned 18 million pieces of hate speech in the last quarter, which sounds really good. And that's how they can say, we took down 18 million pieces of hate speech in one quarter. But 2 billion users are active, and many of them for hours every day. So that comes to 200,000 pieces of hate, 200,000 pieces. That's nothing. And that includes every form of hate. Anti-Semitism, for example, comes often in very subtle forms that are very difficult to detect from AI or even content moderators. And these content moderators are not anti-Semitism scholars, right? Most of the pieces of hate that are taken down are much more obvious pieces that they can easily identify. So we have to demand hate speech regulation in some form because we don't have it and we're the only country who doesn't. So that's ridiculous. We need more resources to protect our public news outlets so that they can actually properly inform us all. We need education about journalistic ethics, about critical reporting, about standards of fact-checking, and so on. And we need to demand the teaching of social media literacy, digital literacy, so that our kids don't fall into the traps. But that also needs to be taught in like senior homes. and like every age needs that education. We need more money spent on moderation. We need more research because, frankly, there is hardly any research. And since Elon Musk took over X/Twitter, it's been impossible to do research. You have to pay like $50,000 a month to be able to use the data. So basically, there's no one really able to do the real research that needs to be done. And then we need to actually talk to each other in person, and I hope that's what we can do now. So that's it. Thank you very much.
I'm going to reintroduce Laura Norwich, who's the Executive Director of the Network for Social Justice. It looks like this doesn't detach, so if you're sitting in the room and you want to ask a question, I'll ask you to just come forward to the microphone, and then otherwise Laura is going to read off questions online to you. Okay? All right, so should we start with the room? Is there anyone in the room with a question? Oh, yeah. Leslie, come on up. I think I'm just going to put it back. I'm going to put it back just to
make it super short. Hi, that was great. Thank you.
Sorry, let me stop screen sharing.
Okay. I'm curious if there's any recommendations you would make as far as, short of us deleting our children's social media accounts, a way to make it a little bit safer. I mean, I would like to delete my children's accounts, but I don't think they'll let me do that. Any tips?
Yeah, I mean, my kids are 28 and 30, and they are telling me, Mom, we're so glad we are older. And we skipped that craziness of the social media. They see it. And what I actually noticed also with them is when they got a little older, they would say, Mom, you were right telling us not to play video games for hours and hours. You were right not to let us have the phone when we wanted it at night in our bedroom or whatever. So they may disagree with you, but you're the adult. and their brains are still developing. And I think parents have to put their foot down. Because I mean, I love how this one family, I heard on the news once, they're doing electronic Shabbat, and the whole family turns off their devices. I think we should model that, because frankly, we're also all addicted to them, right? Not necessarily social media, but I mean, who hasn't touched their phone while listening to me, right? That's just what we do, most of us. And so I think modeling how you will actually turn your phone off and devote your full attention to them, giving them as much opportunity to not even think about their phone by doing stuff like singing, dancing, I don't know, ice skating, getting them off their phone as much as possible. But also, yes, providing them with an understanding of why, explaining them. They're not stupid. They know it's bad for them. They have that instinct. And if you show them that it is addictive and that it's known to be addictive, and that's why these people are suing, I mean, yeah, I'm not an expert on this, but those would be my first steps. Anyone else? Maybe someone is here who knows what worked.
I'm going to jump in with a few questions from home. So I'm going to move this down. All right, so one question, it starts with a comment. I think it turns into a really interesting question. When you consider the power of social media, one needs to look at the language associated with the platform. For example, someone who has thousands of likes and activity on their page are called influencers. So this is a question about influencers. It is a highly sought after profession for young adults. It really is. All my students are into it. That's an example of the power social media holds. These influencers establish themselves as experts, whether they like it or not. Could you speak a little bit to the place of influencers in this social media conversation?
Yeah, it's a new thing, right? But it is fast growing, and since I'm always a glass half full person, my hope would be that eventually the people who actually know something will sort of win out over the people who are just spouting nonsense. In this country, I must admit, I'm a little less optimistic, but I mean, there is something to it that people tend to go for some, they do want quality eventually, I hope. I think, I have it's not a nephew, but my cousin's husband's son has made a fortune as an influencer. And at the beginning, he literally dropped out of college and was starting to do this something really weird that we all thought was like a waste of time. And now he makes like a lot more money than I do. So, this is very attractive. Just like, I don't know, DJing was in my age maybe, or it's like a new thing. And you can do it from your bedroom, and anyone can do it. There's no requirements. There's no minimum education required. There's no checks and balances. There's no threshold. And so maybe that's where we need to come in and say, well, maybe there should be a threshold so that you can't go on social media and become the person that educates about how vaccines are nonsense because you feel like it, and no one can distinguish that from a serious scholar who has researched epidemiology. But that's, I think we're way behind on building the guardrails for these kinds of things. And it reminds me a little bit of the sort of Uber versus taxi or hotel versus Airbnb world, right? Where the same thing sort of happened, that suddenly awful things started happening, and we were like, oh, there was a reason why people needed to have qualifications for driving a taxi. And I think, yeah, it's happening more in Europe, that there's more guardrails, but this influencer thing, I'm not so sure. Gosh, what do you tell young people? Maybe tell young people, again, like I think what the adults shouldn't just leave the room. I think that is what I'm seeing a lot, that adults are sort of like, I don't understand this, I don't get this, I don't like this, but they seem to like it, and then they sort of leave the room. We can't leave the room. We have to actually engage. As little as we may want to, we actually have to talk to the kids about the stuff they're doing and why it is. And we have to maybe even sit next to them for a few hours and say, okay, you tell me why this is awesome, that you're just watching someone play a video game for hours every day. What is so awesome about this? I want to understand, right? I think if we don't just go out and enjoy the quiet, because frankly, it is a babysitter, then maybe we can also have more influence on what they're actually doing, and we can sort of question them. I know with teenagers that's really hard because they're just like rolling their eyes, but yeah, I think my recommendation would be not to leave the room. I know that's not very sophisticated, but it's a start. Yeah, there's a question.
Hi, you talked about regulating social media.
Regulating.
Yeah, how would you do that besides the content moderation?
No, I mean, when it comes to regulating, for example, you could require social media companies to spend a certain percentage of their revenue on content moderation, which they're not, right? You could require that they do some kind of a, I don't know, I mean, they can modify the algorithm, right? So there are ways for them to do it. You know, when we asked Sahar, who's with the Integrity Institute, can this be done? He used an analogy. He said, right now we're selling chocolate laced with heroin, and we're offering kale as the alternative. Now, I'm a huge fan of kale, but most people are not. And he said, we need something in between. So we need to find a way to have what is attractive to it still there, but make it safer by making it a little less viral, a little less toxic, a lot less toxic. We have to find a way, and that would, by regulating, I mean that the government actually has to say, this is not okay. We do that for everything else, right? But for some reason, social media companies, because they say we're just a tech company, we're not really into content, they got away with murder in some sense. So I think it would have to happen at the highest level, but it could probably start at the state level too. Maybe someone could start saying, you know, we don't want to, I don't know, support using these things in our school. I don't know. No, I think it would have to happen at the federal level. So we'd have to start with our congressional delegation and with the Senate, and just, I mean, right now, I can't see it happen because of the Supreme Court being the way it is, and the little bit that we've seen in terms of trying to regulate hasn't worked, right? They ruled in favor of the companies so far.
And also what I find is there is no role model for anyone. Like all the politicians use it so irresponsibly and with no accountability, and it does not help any one of us or even young children these days. So you don't know what you can do about that.
Yeah, I mean, what Yaron Lanier would say is shut it down, don't use it, basically starve them, right? Starve them and make them build it differently so that it's safe. Here's one other issue. It's free. And that is something where you can start. Well, yeah, it's not really free, right? I didn't even mention that at all. But of course, the whole system is built on mining our data, right? Every time you just open the thing. That's why I don't like the idea that people say it's a public space. It's not a public space. It's more like going into a supermarket where there's cameras everywhere and every move of yours is constantly mined. Where does she look? Where does she stay longer? How does she, engage with this product? So that could be addressed. That could be regulated. And again, if people knew more about how it works, I think they would demand that it be regulated. But most people just use it and don't know. And we should pay for something to make it safer, rather than using it for free and then not having any control over it. That's
My last question, Snapchat.
Yeah.
And there is no trace of your chat sessions, which is so dangerous, I think, for young kids.
Yeah.
Although it's stored somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
I mean, talking about storing, right, this is another issue. I mean, you don't even have the right to get rid of it, right? In Spain, someone sued and said, I want all my stuff taken from Google, I think they sued. And they won, and then Google was required to delete everything that this person, because they can, but how can they prove to him that they actually deleted it? So I recommend always Google yourself. If you are at all on any website, Google yourself so that you understand what's actually out there about you. You may be surprised, yeah.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything you're saying about the toxic nature of social media. I'm aggravated that I can't see my friends' posts, that they can't see mine because they're generally happy posts or meaningful posts like Katie when she's posting about something important. But or the time suck or the algorithms, all those things are so horrible, and that it's, creating groups of haters, and it's affecting people and societies and culture and everything else. But there's a bigger problem. It's our leaders. It's the leaders of those companies. It's the political leaders in our country. And I don't believe that even real media companies are even being honest about what they're reporting. Some are honest and biased, but some are not accurate in what they're reporting. They reported conspiracy theories that people are saying were completely false now. I mean, when large media companies can do that, that's a problem too, right? And when politicians can lie. So there has to be accountability from the top down and across everywhere. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't be picking on social media because it's a disaster, but I'm saying that it's our whole society. People lie and there's nothing happens to them.
Yes, of course, and some people lie on purpose and some people lie by accident, because sometimes we say things we don't know are incorrect. But I think, I hope to have made clear that the dimensions are so much bigger because of the algorithmic nature.
Well, I know you're saying it's
the
tricking
reach.
people, but
Well, no,
I mean, a lot of us aren't getting tricked by it, let's be honest. So people have to be accountable for figuring out what's real and what isn't, right? And for being good people and not being hateful to others and not being harmful to others.
Right. No, I
There's
agree.
enough
of
sources
course.
to go to. I mean,
Right, but I think, so for example, if you train to be a journalist, right? Oh, has anyone seen the movie She Said? It's a really good movie for this, because it shows to what length a journalist has to go in order to publish a story. A serious journalist cannot just publish something because they think it's important. If it involves specific people, they have to, for example, get the people on the record in reaction to what they found about them, right? There are rules about doing it right, and if it's found to be false, then they have to publish a correction, for example. That's not the case on social media. And so, yes, of course, we are living in a world where, the media, I mean, we're losing 2 newspapers a week, I just learned, in this country, and we've lost like 400 in a year or something. I mean, no, that doesn't compute, but in a couple of years. So we're losing a lot of newspapers. What that means is, of course, that there's sort of a consolidation of news, which isn't healthy, right? That's why that was one of my recommendations. We really need a diversity of views. And I always tell my students, try to get to watch as many different types of news. The problem is the definition of news is also something you should discuss at the dinner table, because they think news includes what their favorite influencer posts. Because the influencer says, oh, I have some news for you, and then that's news, right? So we actually have to make sure when we talk about news, we're talking about the same thing, right? News is not necessarily what the sports team did this weekend. That's sports news, yes, but that's not news, right? So when we criticize news outlets, and I have to say one of the best outlets for the war in Israel has been Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, has just done a phenomenal job of reporting on this incredibly difficult situation. So when you see a news outlet that actually brings different voices, for example, opinion pieces by people who completely disagree with the government, right? That is a good sign. Then you can trust, because if they publish this opinion one day and the other opinion the next day, then you can see that the paper itself is interested in presenting a breadth of views and not punching you over the head with the news, with the version of the news that they want you to believe, right? And good journalists who often risk their lives, I mean, dozens have been killed in this war for risking their life to bring the stories to us, right? They are so eager to really get the story straight. They go to such lengths to report on something. They want to find the truth. You know, at Brandeis, our motto is truth even unto its innermost parts. And that means the truth is usually not what you see at the surface. You have to dig for it, and you may find something you don't like, right? Which is why when I talk to people who have really crazy views, in my view, I always ask them, can you imagine being wrong? Because if people say, no, I know, I have studied this for decades, I know this is how it is, then I know I can't trust them, because we all know that we can be wrong. And I remember a colleague in physics who retired, and shortly before his retirement, he said, when I was a graduate student in physics, I thought, wow, we're so close to basically explaining the universe. We're so close to knowing everything. And now that I'm retiring, I realize we know like a fraction of what we could know. And so if you hang out with a lot of people that know stuff, you will see that the most often, the most frequent sentence you hear is, I don't know. And if people say, if people don't use that, you should be very suspicious. Yeah.
So I have a son that's African American, and it was really interesting, the 2 points that you made that I'm going to take home. He had to go the route of abstinence.
You might need to go closer to the
My
mic.
son had to go.
Yeah.
He was only 11, 12, 13. Could not regulate, not to save his life. Could not understand how many hours he was on, was completely sucked down the rabbit hole of just more and more violence, more and more sexual content, more and more just aggression. And it's so funny because now my mom is on all the time, and it was very eye-opening for you to talk about. The more she looks at, the more she's actually like entertaining and exacerbating both points. So I don't think that I know I don't have any of the answers, but frankly, I just know that for some people, there's not a certain amount of regulating that can happen, which puts us in a completely different zone where like, what are you kidding? You don't have a phone? No, because we've tried that, right? And I guess when you're 18, you can try it again. But at this point, and I know that that is not the answer for a lot of families, but I just wanted to put that out there that even my mom at 87, I'm going, "Ooh, honey, we need to put that away for a minute." And it's not, she's not having it, so.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And it's really, as I said, the kids know they are addicted. That really struck me when I asked them. They're like, yeah, I'm addicted. Like more and more kids say that. They cannot, in class, they cannot let go of their phones. And of course, when something happened, like what happened in the last few months, that's even more so, right? So they spend even more hours on it. And but older people too, and that has to do, of course, a lot with the pandemic. The pandemic has skyrocketed the use of these devices. It has isolated us. This was the way to stay connected. So it is another consequence of the pandemic. And it's funny when you sometimes bring people together into a room with people they completely disagree with, and they actually have to talk to each other, and then they come away from it thinking, these people are not that crazy. Like, we actually have something in common. I thought at Brandeis last week we did something very beautiful that our dean initiated, because the emotions were so high and people were so afraid of speaking, that we did a full day teach, and they canceled all the classes. I've never had that happen, and it drove all of us nuts, of course. But imagine 3 days before the end of the semester. But and they said, we need to talk about this topic, and they made like a whole day plan where many people gave sessions, but they didn't actually talk about the war. And at first I was like, that's stupid. Like, we should talk about the war. Like, this is what everyone wants to talk about. This is what is on our mind. And I went to all the sessions that I could go to, and I realized, no, this was exactly the right thing to do, because the war itself is so painful, and so many people are hurting, and it is like a bleeding wound. And if you go into that wound and you just make it worse, it's just gonna burst and get infected. But instead, what they did is they sort of put around that wound a bandage, and they made a bandage of information about different things that we probably can agree on. This is what anti-Semitism is. This is what Islamophobia is. This is what free speech is. This is what hate speech is. And they brought experts from the faculty. We were just among ourselves. And I think it was the right thing to do, and it lowered the fear among people, because they realized, oh, we can talk to each other as long as we don't cross a certain line where it becomes painful. And yeah, I think that is a really, for me, I learned a lot. I was completely wrong before, and I learned a lot from the way they approached that. And I see my colleague nodding, so this is something we can learn from, that sometimes when you want to have difficult conversations, don't make them about what is actually making them difficult. Make them about something you think you can find agreement on, so that you can build a shared commonality among each other, and that you can see each other as humans, as fellow humans, and then you can build on that. And eventually, hopefully, that wound will also get smaller and heal, and then you can carefully touch on it. But that was a big learning experience for me. Other questions online, or are we?
I think we're out of time. So
sorry.
no, I could sit here and listen to you all night. You're very, very engaging and interesting, but we did tell people it was going to end at 8:15.
Yes,
so
sorry.
Thank you so much. We're so very privileged again to have you here with us tonight, and we're very, very grateful for everything we've learned. So thank you.
Thank you.